Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment, silent, bitter, and uninvited, when a man stands alone in the ruins of everything he thought mattered. No money, no comfort, no applause, no certainty. It feels like death, but it is not. It is the doorway. And if you are standing at that doorway right now, then listen closely, because this is not the end. This is the sacred beginning, when the noise of the world falls silent, when the distractions die, and when you finally stop pretending, you will see what most never see. That when you are left with nothing, God is not punishing you. He is positioning you. When stripped of everything, a man meets the raw truth of his soul. True strength does not come from abundance. It arises from emptiness. It begins in the silence after the chaos, when the world no longer applauds, when the mirror no longer flatters, and when all the props of identity, status, possessions, relationships have been torn away. In that haunting quiet, something ancient begins to awaken. At first, the emptiness feels like failure, like a void where meaning used to be. But in truth, it's not failure, it's revelation. Because only when a man is emptied can he see what was real and what was merely noise. And in that space, where there is nothing left to prove and no one left to impress, the soul rises, naked, vulnerable, honest. You discover that your strength was never in the things you lost, not in the bank account, the job title, or the lover who once whispered promises. Those were reflections, not roots. They reflected your power, but they did not give you power. And now that they're gone, you face the deeper question. Who are you without them? This is the threshold every man must cross. It is the moment between what was and what could be. It is painful because the identity we built was comfortable, even if it was false. But comfort and truth rarely live in the same room. To become something greater, the lesser self must be broken. And often, that breaking comes as loss. But understand this, the divine does not destroy to punish. It dismantles to rebuild. And what's being rebuilt in you now is not just strength, it's truth. Not the kind of strength that shows up in muscles or dominance, but the kind that lives in silence. The kind that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to be seen. A strength forged in fire, not applause. When you have nothing, you stop performing. There's no one left to impress. And in that raw space you meet yourself for the first time. The voice that was drowned by distractions becomes clear. The fears that were masked by busyness now rise to be faced. And the soul, which had been buried beneath ego and ambition, begins to breathe again. True strength is born here, not in comfort, but in confrontation. Not in praise, but in the quiet decision to rise when no one is watching. To believe when there is no evidence. To continue when the future is unclear. This is the kind of strength the world cannot understand, because it's not loud, it's not marketable, but it is unshakable. In this sacred emptiness, God begins his real work. Not the surface-level miracles, not the blessings we chase like children, but the deep reconstruction of a man's soul. Patience begins to grow where frustration once lived. Faith begins to replace fear. Wisdom rises from the ashes of pain. And suddenly, you are not who you were. You are not broken, you are becoming. This is the secret most never learn. That the emptiness they fear is the path they need. That the silence they avoid contains the voice they have been searching for. But it takes courage. Courage to stay in the stillness long enough to hear. Courage to let go of what no longer serves you. courage to allow the divine to rebuild you, not in your image, but in his. What comes after this emptiness is not a return to the old self. It is the birth of something entirely new. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, love differently. Not because you're pretending to be strong, but because you become strong. And you no longer need what you once clung to, because you have found the source within. When you are left with nothing, don't rush to fill the void. Don't panic. Don't numb the silence. Sit in it. Let it teach you. Let it humble you. Let it strip away what never truly belonged. And when you are ready, when the ego is quiet and the heart is open, then everything you truly need, peace, clarity, purpose, will come. Not all at once, not in the way you expect, but it will come, because now you are ready to receive, not from desperation, but from alignment. You are no longer grasping, you are open, and that is when God gives not just anything, but everything. What feels like ruin is often divine reconstruction in disguise. Most people panic when life begins to unravel. When the job is lost, the relationship collapses, or the future becomes a haze of uncertainty, the first instinct is to ask, why is this happening to me? But rarely do we stop and consider that what looks like the breaking down of our world may actually be the breaking open of our destiny. We live under the illusion that loss is always negative, that when something is taken away we are being punished or abandoned. But what if it's neither? What if the collapse is sacred? What if the chaos is part of a deeper intelligence, one that sees beyond what we think we want and moves us toward what we truly need? Life has a strange way of clearing the path when we refuse to walk away from what no longer serves us. We become so attached to our plans, our desires, our routines, that we forget growth often demands disruption. We want transformation, but we don't want the pain that precedes it. We want purpose, but not the pruning. Yet every tree must be pruned before it bears better fruit. Every man must be broken before it bears better fruit. Every man must be broken before it bears better fruit. Every man must be broken before he can be rebuilt. The truth is, most people only discover their strength when their comfort is stripped away, when the safety nets vanish and there is no clear direction forward. Something remarkable begins to unfold. It is in this moment of free fall, where nothing is certain, that you come face to face with the raw, unfiltered self. And that self, when fully seen, holds the key to everything. You begin to realize that the life you thought was falling apart was actually falling into place. Not the place your mind had designed, but the one your soul had always longed for. Because the things we chase, status, security, acceptance, often distract us from the deeper call within. And sometimes the only way to hear that call is through the silence that follows collapse. The job you lost may have been a cage. The relationship that ended may have been a mirror of your own unhealed wounds. The plan that failed may have been keeping you from a path far more aligned with your purpose. But you couldn't see it then. You were too close, too invested. So life intervened. It broke what had to be broken, not to destroy you, but to save you. It's only when we look back that we understand the wisdom in our losses. That breakup that shattered you taught you how to choose yourself. That closed door forced you to walk through the one that led to real freedom. That moment of rock bottom turned out to be the very ground you needed to build a new life. You don't see it right away. At first, all you feel is the sting, the disorientation, the sense of betrayal by life, by God, by the universe. But stay there long enough, breathe through the confusion, and a new awareness begins to rise. You start to sense that something is happening, not to you, but for you, the destruction of your old life becomes the foundation of your new one. And not just a better version of what you had, but something entirely different, deeper, wiser, more true. This is divine reconstruction, not a bandage over a wound, but the complete healing of the soul from the inside out. But here's the catch. You must allow it. You must let go of the urge to rebuild what was. You must stop trying to glue the old pieces back together, because what is being offered to you now is not a repair, it is a rebirth. And to step into it, you must release your grip on how you thought your life was supposed to look. This surrender is not weakness. It is power in its purest form. A design not of your own making, but one that knows you better than you know yourself. You cannot know it. Something happens, and we go still. This may seem a necessity. A design not of your own making, but one that knows you better than you know yourself. The next time you feel everything is falling apart, stop. Breathe. Look again. Maybe it's not the end. Maybe it's the blueprint being cleared. Maybe it's the scaffolding of an old life being torn down to make room for something extraordinary. And when you finally understand this, not in theory, but in the marrow of your being, you'll stop fearing the fall. Because you'll know that what looks like ruin is almost always the beginning of a resurrection. Attachment is the illusion that blocks the divine. We walk through life gripping tightly to the things we think define us, our careers, our relationships, our image, our routines. These attachments feel like anchors, like stability, like meaning, but in truth they are often walls. Walls that separate us from the deeper reality that wants to unfold through us. And the tighter we hold on, the more we block what's trying to flow into our lives. We mistake possession for security. We cling to what we know, even if it's suffocating us. The job that drains us, the person who no longer sees us, the version of ourselves we've outgrown. Yet we refuse to let go. Why? Because we fear the unknown more than the slow death of staying the same. The ego would rather be miserable in familiar territory than lost in mystery. But the soul longs for freedom, and that freedom can only come when we loosen our grip. To truly receive the divine, to truly align with something greater than your limited plans, you must become empty. Not numb, not passive, but open, receptive, unclenched. You cannot hold the infinite with hands full of the finite. You cannot hear truth when your mind is cluttered with attachment to outcomes. This is why suffering often comes through loss, not because life is cruel, but because letting go voluntarily is something most people will never do. We tend to believe that what we hold on to gives us value, that the title means we matter, that the relationship makes us worthy, that the money gives us power. But these are illusions. They're not inherently wrong, but when we build our identity around them, we give away our center. We hand our peace to things that can be taken away, and what can be taken away is never truly yours. Attachment whispers that without this thing, this person, this identity, you are nothing. But the truth is the opposite. Only in the absence of these illusions do you discover your wholeness, not because something is added, but because the noise is removed. What remains is clarity, stillness, presence. These are not qualities you earn. They are your original state, revealed only when the clutter is cleared. This is not about detachment as cold indifference. It is about allowing things to come and go without gripping them in fear, to love without owning, to work without becoming the work, to walk through life with open hands instead of closed fists. Because when your hands are open, you are free to receive. You are also free to let go. And that is where peace lives, in the space between holding on and the divine cannot fill what is already full. It cannot move where there is no space. This is why spiritual awakenings often come in moments of collapse, when everything we thought mattered is stripped away. It is in those moments, when all that remains is the self, that we finally glimpse the truth, that what we thought we needed, we never truly did, that the love we were chasing already lives within us, that the peace we longed for was buried under layers of needing, wanting, grasping. There is a quiet power in surrender, in loosening the grip, in saying, I do not need this to be whole. That surrender is not defeat. It is alignment. It is the invitation for something greater to enter, something you didn't plan, something you didn't expect, but something that knows exactly what your soul needs to grow, to expand, to be set free. You must be willing to release the life you planned so you can embrace the life that is waiting, not because the plan was wrong, but because it was small, limited by your current understanding. The divine sees what you cannot. It leads not with force, but with invitation. And you can only follow that invitation if your hands are free to reach for it. Ask yourself, gently but honestly, what are you clinging to? What are you afraid to lose, and is it truly serving you, or just keeping you safe in a story that's already ended? The deeper life does not begin when you gain more, it begins when you need less. When your identity no longer depends on what you hold, when you are no longer afraid to let go, that's when something beautiful happens. That's when the divine rushes in, not as a reward, but as a natural result of space being made. Let go, not because you're giving up, but because you're waking up. And in that awakening, you will find everything you were searching for was already within you, waiting to be uncovered beneath the weight of all you thought you needed. The collapse of the ego creates space for grace. As long as the ego sits on the throne of your life, there is no room for anything else to reign, not truth, not humility, not divine presence. The ego demands attention. It feeds on control, validation, and comparison. It wants to be seen, to be right, to be superior. But in its hunger to be everything, it becomes a barrier to the very thing it seeks wholeness. Ego builds walls disguised as strength. It says, I can handle it alone, even when you're breaking inside. It says, I know best, even when your life is unraveling. It clings to titles, achievements, and appearances, hoping that if it can just hold it all together on the outside, maybe the inside will finally feel real. But it never does, because the ego isn't rooted in truth. It's rooted in fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being unseen. Fear of surrender. As long as that false self stays intact, grace remains distant. Grace requires surrender. It does not crash through locked doors. It waits at the threshold until you open it. And most often, the door only opens when the ego collapses, when your plans fall apart, when your strength fails you, when the image you've been curating begins to crack. In that moment, as painful as it is, you are finally free. Not because the pain is good, but because it brings you into reality. The collapse strips away the roles you played. It pulls back the curtain on the illusions you believed, and standing in the ruins of what once propped up your identity, you come face to face with the deeper self, the one that does not need to be anything other than present. It's only there, in the humility of being undone, that grace can enter. Grace does not come to the man who still believes he can fix everything, control everyone, or outperform his emptiness. Grace comes to the man who finally admits, I don't know. I can't do this alone. I need something more. That admission is not weakness. It is the beginning of wisdom. The ego resists this truth with everything it has. It tells you that you must always be strong, always be right, always be ahead. It tells you that vulnerability is failure. But grace doesn't move through perfection. It moves through cracks, through the surrendered spaces where you no longer have anything to prove. Something unexpected happens. You stop needing to control everything. You stop needing to be admired, feared, or envied. You stop trying to manipulate life into matching your expectations, and instead you begin to trust. You begin to see that there is a flow to life, a rhythm, a wisdom that operates far beyond your ego's understanding. And in that trust, you begin to soften. You begin to open. You realize that the collapse was not a curse, it was a cleansing. The grace that begins to fill you isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or noise. It comes gently, like a quiet knowing, like peace that doesn't need a reason, like love that doesn't need to be earned. You start to move differently, not with arrogance, but with presence. Not with desperation, but with clarity. You understand now why everything had to fall apart, why you had to be brought to your knees. Because until that moment, your hands were too full to receive. Your heart was too guarded to feel. Your mind was too busy proving itself to hear anything deeper. But now, in the stillness after the collapse, there is space. And in that space, there is grace. It teaches you to forgive, to release, to be. You begin to live from the inside out, rather than constantly reaching outward for validation. You begin to realize that what you lost was not yourself, but only what was never truly you. Let the ego collapse. Let it burn if it must. Do not cling to what was built on fear and illusion. Let it fall, and trust that something greater will rise in its place. Not a new version of pride, but the quiet strength of presence. The kind of presence where grace flows effortlessly, because there is finally nothing in the way, and in that state you are not less you. You are finally real. Pain humbles the mind and softens the heart. It is the one teacher we all try to avoid, and yet it's the one that shapes us most deeply. When everything is going well, we believe we are in control. The ego inflates, the mind becomes proud, and we begin to live as if life owes us its favor. But pain arrives without warning, without invitation, and without apology. It breaks through our illusions like a storm, and in its wake it leaves us exposed, raw, and profoundly human. This is where the transformation begins, not in the comfort of certainty, but in the disruption of everything we thought we understood. Pain strips away the distractions. It silences the noise. The mind, once filled with opinions, judgments, and stories, begins to quiet down under the weight of suffering. The arguments don't matter anymore. The pride loses its edge. Suddenly the only thing you crave is truth, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that heals. Pain has a way of making you listen, really listen, not just to others, but to yourself, to the small, aching voice you've ignored for years, to the deeper longings buried beneath your ambition, to the parts of yourself you pretended didn't exist because they made you feel weak. But in the silence that follows heartbreak, loss, or failure, those parts speak loudest And for the first time, you're not too busy to hear them. We often live our lives in resistance. Resistance to discomfort, to uncertainty, to vulnerability. But pain melts that resistance. It humbles the mind that once thought it knew everything. It brings us to our knees, not in defeat, but in awakening. It forces us to look in the mirror and ask the questions we've avoided. Who am I really? What truly matters? Why am I here? These are not questions of the mind, these are questions of the soul. In suffering, the heart becomes tender, the edges soften, compassion grows, you begin to understand others in a way you never could when life was easy. You see their pain because you've met your own. You stop judging so quickly, you stop speaking so loudly, because now you know, deep down, that everyone is carrying something invisible. Everyone is trying to survive their own invisible war. There's a sacredness in that kind of humility, a quiet strength. It doesn't need to perform. It doesn't seek applause, it simply exists in stillness, in presence. And from that place you begin to live differently. You begin to love differently. You stop needing to be right all the time. You stop needing to win every battle. You realize that peace is more valuable than pride. Pain also teaches patience. When you're in it, time slows down. The days feel longer, the nights even more so. And in that space of waiting to heal, to understand, to breathe again, you start to see the world through new eyes. You start to value the small things. A kind word, a moment of silence, the warmth of the sun on your skin. These things, once overlooked, now become sacred. And through it all, something beautiful begins to grow within you, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. A deeper wisdom, a more grounded faith, a strength that doesn't shout but simply is. You begin to see that what you thought was the end was actually the beginning, that the breaking was really a birthing, that the wound became the womb for a new self to emerge. You are not the same person you were before the pain, and that's the point. You're not supposed to be. The pain refined you. It burned away what was false. It awakened what was asleep. It forced you to feel, to question, to change. It gave you depth. It gave you grace. It gave you the eyes to see the sacred in the ordinary. Do not despise your pain. Do not curse the night. Let it do its work. Let it humble your mind and soften your heart. Let it make you more human, more whole. Because in the end, pain doesn't come to destroy. It comes to transform. And if you let it, it will leave you not broken, but reborn. When a man is left with nothing, he discovers what cannot be taken. It is one of life's most paradoxical truths. Only in complete loss do we come face to face with what is truly ours. When the titles vanish, the possessions disappear, the loved ones walk away, and the world no longer applauds, what remains? That is the question that strips a man bare, not to shame him, but to reveal him. Because everything external can be lost, and one day it will be. But there is a center within you that no storm can touch. Most people spend their lives accumulating money, respect, status, security. These things are not inherently wrong, but when they become the foundation of identity, they turn into a prison. You start to believe that who you are is defined by what you have. And so you guard it, you stress over it, and you fear losing it. But life has a way of shaking those foundations, sometimes slowly, other times in an instant. It strips you of what you thought made you strong, and suddenly you're standing alone, unrecognized, uncertain, and afraid. This is the place where many lose themselves. But it is also the place where a deeper truth is revealed. For when everything is gone, and you are left with nothing but your breath and your awareness, you begin to realize you were never those things. You were never the house, the job, the approval, the role. They were costume worn in the theater of life. But the actor behind the costume, the still, silent observer, remains untouched. You start to see how much of your energy was spent performing, trying to maintain an image, trying to be someone. But now that no one is watching, you no longer need to pretend. There is no one left to impress. And in that quiet, something ancient awakens in you. A knowing. A peace, a subtle joy that does not depend on circumstance. You realize you are not your story. You are the awareness of the story. This realization is not always immediate. Often the space of nothingness feels like a void, like death, like abandonment. But in truth, it is a womb, a sacred stillness from which a new self can emerge, not the self you built through effort, but the self that was always there beneath the noise, the self that belongs not to the world but to something higher. When you have nothing, you begin to appreciate everything. A sunrise becomes a miracle. A kind word feels like gold. A moment of silence becomes a doorway to the eternal. You see more clearly. You listen more deeply. You love without conditions. Because now there is nothing left to prove, nothing left to hide behind. This is where the divine meets you, not in your strength, but in your surrender, not in your wealth, but in your emptiness. Because when your hands are empty, they are open, open to receive, open to be filled with what is real. And what is real is never loud, never flashy. It is stillness. It is truth. It is grace. You begin to understand why life had to take what it did. It was never punishment. It was an invitation. An invitation to meet the you that cannot be lost. And that you is powerful not in the way the world defines power, but in the way that mountains are powerful. Silent, unmoved, grounded in something deeper than surface appearances. You are no longer afraid of starting over, because now you know you carry everything that matters within you. You are no longer defined by outcomes, because now you are aligned with purpose. You are no longer desperate for validation, because now you are anchored in truth. The man who has nothing fears nothing. And in that fearlessness, he finds freedom. If you find yourself stripped of all you once relied on, do not panic. Do not rush to fill the void. Sit in it. Breathe through it. Listen to what it's trying to teach you. Because in that emptiness is the seed of everything real. And when it begins to grow, you will rise not as who you were, but as who you truly are. When a man is left with nothing, he finds what he could never lose: his soul, his peace, his connection to the divine. And that is everything. God doesn't speak in noise. He speaks in silence. And only when a man is emptied of the world's distractions can he begin to hear. Most people spend their lives surrounded by noise, the hum of constant activity, the pull of desire, the chatter of the mind, always needing more, always fearing lack. In this chaos, the divine whisper is drowned out. It's not that God isn't speaking, it's that we are too loud to listen. The truth is, silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a posture of the soul. It is the space between thoughts, the stillness beneath striving, the breath that is taken not to speak, but to be. When a man loses everything, his possessions, his pride, his plans, He is forced into that silence, not by choice, but by circumstance. And at first it feels like punishment, like abandonment. But in time it becomes sacred, because in that silence, something begins to awaken. The voice of God doesn't compete. It doesn't shout above your ego, your ambition, or your fear. It waits. It waits for you to grow tired of the performance, the noise, the endless chasing. It waits for you to sit down, to unclench your fists, to let the world fall away. And when you do, when you are still enough to hear, you will realize the voice of God was always there, not in thunder or flame, but in the quiet knowing you always ignored. This is the paradox. When we are full, we hear nothing. When we are empty, we hear everything. The man who has lost all distractions, who no longer hides behind success or the illusion of control, begins to hear the inner voice clearly. It may not sound like words, but it is unmistakable. A sense of peace that defies reason, a knowing that cannot be explained, a pull towards something higher, deeper, more true. Silence. Revelation arises. Not from effort, but from stillness. And the voice that comes is not separate from you. It is you as you truly are, aligned with the divine. The guidance is not a command from above, but a remembrance from within, a remembering of what you were before the world told you what to be. It's like the return of a long-forgotten song that your soul knew by heart, even before your name was spoken. But few ever make it here. Most are terrified of silence, because silence reveals. It exposes the lies we tell ourselves. It shows us where we are out of alignment. It brings to the surface the pain we've buried, the truths we've ignored. And yet, this is grace, because only what is seen can be healed. Only what is acknowledged can be released. In silence, the illusions dissolve. The truth remains. When you are stripped of everything you thought mattered, you are finally quiet enough to receive what truly does. Divine wisdom, divine peace, divine love, not as a concept, but as an experience. It arrives not to fix you, but to remind you that you were never broken, just distracted, just lost in the noise. In this stillness, God gives more than information. He gives presence. He gives himself. You begin to feel carried, not by your effort, but by something beyond it. You begin to live from intuition, not intellect, from surrender, not strategy. You act not to prove, but because you are moved. And what moves you is truth, deep, simple, and sacred. The man who listens in silence walks differently. He speaks less, but with more clarity. He acts with purpose, not panic. He does not need to announce himself, because he is anchored in something greater than the need for recognition. He is not driven by fear, because he is led by trust. Not blind faith, but faith born from experience, because he has heard the voice in the silence and he knows it is real. If you find yourself in the quiet, stripped of all the distractions you once leaned on, do not rush to fill the space. Wait, breathe, listen. There is wisdom here, there is guidance here, there is God here. And in that stillness you will hear not just what to do, but who you are. And that knowing will change everything. Rock bottom is not the end. It is the threshold. When everything crumbles, when you have no one to lean on, and when all the familiar roads disappear, It feels like death. But it is in truth a beginning. Not the kind of beginning that comes with celebration or applause, but the sacred kind. The kind that happens in the dark. The kind that changes you at the core. Because when a man hits rock bottom, he is forced to confront himself, not the version he shows the world, but the one that hides behind masks and distractions. This confrontation is brutal. There is no hiding at the bottom, no more pretending, no more blaming others. All the illusions you carried shatter. The ego that once shielded you is stripped bare. And what remains? Just you. Vulnerable, uncertain, exposed. It is in this very place of ruin that a strange kind of clarity is born. Because now, with nothing left to lose, you are finally free to see what truly matters. Rock bottom strips away the non-essential. It doesn't ask for permission, it takes. It removes everything you thought you need so that you can finally see what you've always had. And here lies the paradox. In the place that feels like complete abandonment, you often encounter your deepest connection to the divine. Not because God suddenly shows up, but because all the noise that drowned him out is gone. It is in rock bottom that you understand survival is not strength, surrender is. The strength you once boasted about, the ability to push through, to fight harder, to hold on longer, no longer works here. Because this is not a place of force. It is a place of transformation. The man who surrenders at rock bottom does not give up, he lets go. He releases the grip on how he thought life should be. And in that release, space opens up for something new. And that something new is often unexpected. It doesn't come in the form of quick answers or easy fixes. It comes as a slow rebuilding, a reawakening, a rediscovery of self. You start to ask deeper questions, not just how do I get out of this, but what am I meant to learn from this? Who am I without the things I lost? What kind of man do I want to become? This is where faith becomes real. Not the faith taught in words, but the faith discovered in silence. You learn to trust not because you can see the whole path, but because you've been through the fire, and something in you still refuses to die. That something is your soul. And rock bottom introduces you to it. You begin to rise, not because you figured everything out, but because you surrendered what no longer served you. You rise because you stopped resisting the truth. You rise because, in your brokenness, you became teachable. You became present. And most importantly, you became honest. Honesty is born in the ashes. At rock bottom, lies have no power. You no longer have the energy to perform, to pretend, to please. You simply are. And in that state of raw authenticity, God does his deepest work, not in fixing your circumstances, but in reshaping your soul. You begin to build again, but this time with intention, with humility, with clarity. You no longer build to impress others. You build to live in truth. You no longer pursue what is flashy. You value what is real. The people you now surround yourself with are different. The choices you make are different. Because you are different. You understand now why the fall was necessary, why the pain came. It was not to punish, it was to prepare. To empty you of what was false, so that you could be filled with what is true. Rock bottom became the ground upon which your true life could begin. If you find yourself in the depths, do not despair. You are not buried, you are being planted. The darkness is not your end, it is your womb. From this place something holy is being formed. And when you rise, and you will not be the same, you will be wiser, quieter, stronger, more aligned with your purpose, more aware of your soul, and more connected to the God who never left you, even in the silence. True transformation is not a momentary event. It is a journey that unfolds over time, a subtle, continuous becoming rather than a sudden change. When a man is left with nothing, it is not just his external circumstances that shift, but the very fabric of his being. The experience strips away the superficial layers, his possessions, his status, his ego, and reveals the essence beneath. This essence is raw and vulnerable, but it is also fertile ground for profound transformation. The process is neither comfortable nor easy. It requires patience and persistence, a willingness to sit with discomfort and uncertainty without rushing to escape. Many seek quick fixes, a sudden miracle that will restore what was lost. But true transformation is quieter, slower. It is like the gradual shaping of a sculpture by a master's hand, chip by chip, layer by layer, until the form emerges, not from force, but from careful attention and intention. When everything is taken away, the man is left face to face with himself. This confrontation can be terrifying because it means seeing beyond the roles he played and the stories he told himself. It means encountering the fears, doubts, and wounds that he had hidden beneath accomplishments and distractions. It is precisely this encounter that allows transformation to begin. Without recognition, healing cannot start. Without facing what is broken, what is true cannot emerge. In this vulnerable state, a deep internal alchemy occurs. The pain of loss becomes a catalyst for growth. The emptiness that once felt like a void begins to fill with something new. Clarity of purpose, a sense of inner peace, a connection to something greater than the self. This is the birth of wisdom, the kind of wisdom that cannot be taught but must be lived. Transformation at this level changes the way a man relates to the world. He no longer defines himself by what he owns or what others think of him. Instead, he finds identity in his inner truth. This shift brings freedom, the freedom to live authentically, to pursue what truly matters without fear or pretense. It is a freedom that comes from surrender, not resistance, from acceptance rather than denial. But this transformation also brings responsibility. The man who has been shaped by loss and silence understands that his life is no longer his own. He is part of a larger whole, connected to others and to the divine in a way he never was before. His choices carry weight not just for himself, but for those around him. This awareness fosters humility and compassion, qualities that grow naturally when one has seen both the depths of despair and the heights of grace. The journey of transformation is ongoing. There will be moments of doubt, setbacks, and challenges. The past may call with old fears, and the future may seem uncertain, but the man who has embraced this path knows that every step, every struggle, is part of the unfolding. He trusts the process because he has felt the presence of something beyond himself, guiding him forward. Transformation is a gift that arises from surrender. It is the grace that appears when a man stops clinging to what was and opens himself fully to what can be. It is the profound knowing that losing everything is not the end, but the beginning of a new way of being, one grounded in truth, resilience, and the quiet power of faith. God gives everything not as a replacement for what was lost, but as a deeper, more enduring fulfillment. It is a fulfillment that transcends material wealth and worldly success. It is the fulfillment of the soul's purpose, the alignment of the heart with the divine. And it is here, in this sacred transformation, that a man finds his true strength, not in what he has, but in who he has become. When a man is left with nothing, it may seem like the world has abandoned him, but in truth it is the beginning of a profound awakening. Stripped of distractions, he is invited into a silence where the divine speaks softly, where the noise of life falls away, and the soul is free to listen. Rock bottom is not a place of defeat, but a sacred threshold where transformation begins, where surrender replaces struggle and vulnerability becomes strength. Through this journey, the man rediscovers his true self, finds clarity beyond circumstance, and embraces a deeper connection to the divine within. In losing everything, he gains everything. The freedom to live authentically, the wisdom born of hardship, and a faith that carries him beyond what the eyes can see. This is the divine paradox. Only when we lose all do we find the fullness of life.